What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my favorite casts of companions across a few different games. This is something people have been asking me for recently, actually, and believe it or not, it's not something I've really covered much of up to this point. While I tend to cover the companions that are relevant to particular games when I review them, I don't typically offer a lot of personal opinions about them, and this is largely because I find companions to be very subjective. For every companion you dislike, I can almost guarantee you there is somebody out there that loves that companion, which I think is part of why they are so interesting in terms of the broader industry of gaming. But unsurprisingly, you're going to see a decent amount of BioWare on this list, as BioWare and Obsidian do have a lot of great writers there who I think write really great companions. Moreover, before we dive in, I will likely do another list at some point of my actual favorite companions. However, what we're talking about here are the entire rosters of companions. Groups that I feel mesh well and have a lot of cool dynamics where I liked the team more so than the individual companions. Because while I do enjoy some of these companions on an individual level, more than anything, I think as a team, they're more interesting. But we'll focus on individuals another time. But with all of that said, let's actually dive into this thing, and we'll get the obvious one out of the way first, the Mass Effect series, more specifically Mass Effect 1 for me personally. Because while the Mass Effect series does, of course, have a pretty substantial roster of really cool companions, the ones I find myself most attached to were the original companions that made it all the way through the trilogy, and thus saw the most character development. So that brings me to Mass Effect 1, especially seeing how this is our first outing, and each of these companions, typically speaking, represents a faction as well as a new species that you're just being introduced to. And then, in addition to these things, you get to see them, as the series evolves, also watch them grow and change, which I found really rewarding. But combine that with the Mass Effect series' very interesting lore and setting, and a universe that feels very well built, and you unsurprisingly have a great cast of companions that bounce off of each other really well. It is unsurprising to me that most of people's favorite companions for the Mass Effect games come from the first game. But moving right along to our second entry, we have Dragon Age 2. My least favorite Dragon Age game, to be honest, but something I actually do really enjoy about it is the companions themselves are really well done. And as a whole, I really enjoy seeing both Hawk as well as your companions grow and change over the course of time in a somewhat similar manner to the reason I enjoy them from the Mass Effect series, in a slightly smaller fashion. But while there are companions I prefer from Origins and Inquisition on an individual level, I do think Dragon Age 2 has the best entire roster of companions. A lot of them are just very interesting, and again, you get to see them grow and change, which makes them feel more like actual people as opposed to someone filling a specific role on your team. But let's be real, I think Varric kind of steals the spotlight here. Easily my favorite of this group, but I find all of them pretty interesting, such as Aveline and Fenris. But moving on to our third entry, we have Shadowrun Dragonfall, my favorite of the Shadowrun series, or the Shadowrun trilogy, and it has some really great companions, even if they are relatively few in number. Though to be honest, this might be why they are so great. They might have been able to focus specifically on these ones, as in addition to your character, there's really only 4 other companions who are actually going to join you on missions. But one thing I think really helps out in this regard is that each of them tends to focus on a very specific personal problem, typically from their past, in addition to sort of slowly eking that information out to you over the course of the game. For instance, we have Glory, your medic, who is actually a very heavily augmented individual with a lot of cybernetic enhancements. However, these enhancements are incredibly old, and she refuses to get them upgrade, and she honestly rarely talks to anyone and comes across as very cold, and you can kind of figure out why and eventually help with that, and the story behind it is really interesting. And then we have Dietrich, a punk rock shaman who is honestly all about fighting the power, who is often at odds with the sort of human supremacists of the Shadowrun universe, people who look down on the more recent races like the trolls, etc. But again, just a really cool cast of characters where every one of them I thought was really interesting, even if they are at times at odds with each other, despite them all being Shadowrunners. And that brings us to our fourth entry, and it is the Neverwinter Nights 2 companion, specifically from the main campaign. I really enjoyed this particular crew when I went through the game relatively recently, and the banter and dialogue between companions is especially well done. You'll often get whole scenes of just them talking back and forth, which again really drives home their personality and sort of inter-party relationships, if you will. And then you top that off with their, again, personal quests. And each one of them has something kind of specific going on with them that you can kind of help them work through. And overall, it's all really interesting. And again, a lot of the dialogue back and forth, it really feels like a cohesive team by the time you're done, despite one rather obvious companion, I will say, who is rather caustic compared to everybody else for plot reasons. But it's a game that handles its companions very well, and how you treat them does matter, as it does affect a few different things. Ultimately, it's a shame that the ending of Neverwinter Nights 2 kind of throws it all away. Again, without spoilers, I won't go into details here, but unfortunately, the ending of Neverwinter Nights 2 does kind of undermine a lot of what the campaign built up, which I think is so disappointing because of how well written and everything the companions were up to that point. And I had become somewhat invested in each of them that watching the ending throw it away was a real bummer. But as a group, big fan of the companions in Neverwinter Nights 2. But that, of course, brings us to our last entry, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. This is a game where I enjoy pretty much all of the companions, though it is probably worth mentioning that there is a slight difference here between companions and sidekicks. Companions are the characters that have a full background as well as companion quests and basically a full story. And then there are several sidekicks that you can recruit and use as party members who will have unique dialogue at times, but don't really have a quest. But Deadfire has a great cast of companions, many of which return from the original game, so if you've played that, you'll likely have some history with them already, but then you add in the new companions, such as Maya or Takehu. Something Deadfire does really well is that each of these companions, typically speaking, represents a faction, and aiding that particular companion with their quest often aids their faction at the same time, which can cause a lot of problems back and forth between your individual party members. And in fact, depending on your choices through the game, some of them will leave you as their faction simply doesn't support what you're doing. And whether you choose to balance all that or kind of lean into it one direction is largely up to you, but it's something I thought was really well done, and I enjoyed the sort of inter-party politics behind all of it. And then you, as the watcher, sort of have to deal with the fallout of a situation you might not have even been fully aware of. But Deadfire has some great companions that are a great way to learn about the universe and the lore of the game, and that's why I enjoy them as a team so much. But there you guys go. There are 5 of my favorite rosters of companions across video games, and sooner or later we'll talk about my actual individual favorites. But in the meantime, by all means, let me know down in the comment section below all about how you feel about individual companions, rosters of companions, whatever floats your boat. And don't forget to like and subscribe while you're at it. But regardless of all that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.